AITA for being disgusted and just saying okay when my fiancé broke up with me? So, I don't even know where to begin with this. It's all still so fresh and, honestly, surreal. But I guess it's best to just lay it all out there. Maybe it'll help me make sense of things, and I could use some outside opinions. I, 28F, had been with my fiancé, Alex, 34M, for 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's party back in 2020, hit it off immediately, and the relationship just naturally flowed from there. It wasn't a whirlwind romance in the dramatic sense, but it was comfortable, like settling into a well-worn, cozy sweater. You know, the kind where you feel completely at ease, like you found someone who gets you. That's how I felt with him, at least, in the beginning. Alex had just finished his doctorate in economics last year and landed a pretty decent job at the university. It wasn't high-paying, but it was something he was passionate about, and I respected that. I've always believed that fulfillment in your career is worth more than money. As for me, I have a master's in media sciences. While I could have gone for a PhD, I decided it wasn't for me. I was ready to start my career, and I landed a good job pretty quickly after finishing school. I'm comfortable where I am, both professionally and financially. I've always been pragmatic. Why accumulate more debt for a degree I didn't really need when I could start building my future now? Alex never openly criticized this decision, but looking back, maybe that was the first crack in our relationship. For the first 2 years, things were great. We moved in together after dating for a year and started building what I thought was the foundation of a solid future. We shared expenses, though it wasn't strictly 50-50ths. Since Alex was a PhD student at the time and making less, I naturally covered more of the costs. It didn't bother me at all. I figured it was temporary, he was chasing his dream, and I had a stable job. We were a team, after all, and I was proud of him for pursuing what he loved. But then, something started to shift. Over the past few months, Alex began acting strange. At first, it was subtle, but it quickly escalated into something I couldn't ignore. He'd make random demands and then drop them just as fast. One week, he told me we needed to repaint our walls, which were dark green, to a more neutral white. When I asked why, he snapped at me, "For fuck's sake, just forget it." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. I was left scratching my head, wondering what just happened. And that was just one of many examples. Another time, I came home from work, exhausted and cramping from my period, so I curled up on the couch with a blanket over my head, trying to binge-watch a mindless show on Netflix. He walked in, took one look at me, and immediately got upset. "You're just sitting there doing nothing? What the hell, the whole place looks like a mess." Now, keep in mind, the apartment was spotless. I'm not even exaggerating, it was one of those rare moments where everything was in its place, and I had made an effort to tidy up despite feeling like crap. When I tried to ask what was bothering him, he dismissed it with his now classic line, "Forget it. It's not a big deal." But it was becoming a big deal. Every attempt I made to communicate, to get him to open up about what was really going on, was shut down with the same cold response. What was worse was that his complaints were becoming more and more irrational. Sometimes it was about the apartment. Sometimes it was about my clothes. Sometimes it was about the fact that I had taken on more responsibilities at work, something he had always supported in the past. I tried to give him space, assuming he was just stressed with his new job. But every time I thought I was doing the right thing, it backfired. One weekend, I told him I was going to help my parents with some house repairs for a few days. He got weirdly upset and said he wanted to renovate our apartment. The thing is, he hadn't mentioned any desire to renovate before that moment, so I was confused. I asked him when he wanted to start, but he waved it off and acted like it wasn't important anymore. It was like living with a ticking time bomb. Any small thing could set him off, but he never gave me any clue as to why. Then came last Monday, and let me tell you, I've never experienced anything like this before in my life. I was at work when I got a text from Alex. It was one of those dreaded "we need to talk" messages, and I knew immediately what was coming. After months of tension, passive-aggressive remarks, and his erratic behavior, I had already made peace with the idea that this relationship might be over. I'd been preparing myself emotionally for a breakup, but I still wasn't ready for what actually happened. I walked into the apartment that evening, and Alex was already sitting on the couch. He didn't even give me time to take off my jacket before he blurted out, "I want to break up." No build-up, no preamble, just like that, he dropped the bomb. But that wasn't even the worst part. After that initial statement, he launched into this bizarre, convoluted rant that left me feeling absolutely floored. He told me that he resented me. Not for anything specific that I'd done recently, but because I hadn't pursued my academic career further. He said he had never wanted to upset me by admitting it, but he thought I was capable of so much more, and my decision to stop at a master's degree had disappointed him. That was news to me. He had never expressed any issue with my decision, and now it was suddenly a problem? It didn't stop there. He went on to say that when I started making more money than he did, he resented that, too. He said that even though I never lorded it over him, he felt like I had the final say in our financial decisions and hated it. He admitted that this was a rule he imposed on himself, but he still resented me for it. Then came the real kicker. He told me he hated the color of our walls, the couch we had picked out together, and even the fucking crockpot we used to make dinners. I was just standing there, staring at him, trying to process everything, and it was getting harder and harder to keep a neutral expression. But the part that hit the hardest was when he told me that he had applied to a better PhD program overseas and had been accepted. He never told me he had even applied. Instead, he stayed in our city, started working at the university, and silently resented me for ruining his life because I had already started my job and he didn't want to ask me to move. At this point, I was beyond hurt. I was disgusted. My reaction, Oak? After listening to him blame me for everything wrong in his life, I just felt this overwhelming sense of nausea. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. This wasn't the person I had loved for 4 years. I looked at him, probably with a look of disgust on my face, and simply said, okay, that's it. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just said okay, because what else was there to say? He had unloaded all this resentment, blame, and bitterness onto me, and I was just done. And you know what? He lost it. He started shouting that this was exactly what he meant, that my calm reaction was proof that I didn't care, that I was cold and indifferent. He said, "We've been together for 4 years, and all you have to say is okay?" I asked him if he wanted to stay in the apartment while he figured out where to go next. That only made him angrier. He accused me of holding the apartment over him and started ranting again, but I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and left. I went straight to my parents' house, where I told them everything. My dad suggested I contact our landlord to explain the situation and see what options I had regarding the lease. I have no problem continuing to pay rent on my own. Alex had been covering utilities and a few subscription services, which I can easily handle without him. But the emotional toll? That's something I'm still grappling with. Alex continues to text me, alternating between cold, business-like messages about the logistics of moving out and angry rants about how I've ruined his life. I don't even feel hurt anymore. I just feel disgusted and nauseated by him. So, AITA for just saying okay when my fiancé broke up with me? Should I have reacted differently? Story 2, AITA for telling my sister her husband was cheating on her with her best friend, and now their marriage is over? This entire situation has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about right and wrong, loyalty, and family. I feel like I've torn my whole family apart, but at the same time, how could I have stayed silent? It's a mess, and I guess I need to start from the beginning to make sense of it all. Maybe writing it out will help me process, and maybe someone can give me a little clarity on whether I did the right thing or not. I'm 32F, the younger sister of Emily, 34F. Emily's been married to John, 36M, for 7 years. To anyone who knows them, they seemed like the perfect couple. You know the type, high school sweethearts who everyone envied. Emily and John had been together for so long that people practically saw them as a unit. They did everything together, from family gatherings to vacations with friends, and they seemed completely in sync. I always admired their relationship. To me, they represented what a stable, loving marriage looked like. They had their little quirks, sure, but what couple didn't? Then there was Sarah. Sarah's been Emily's best friend since we were all kids. Sarah and I never really clicked the way she and Emily did, but she was still like family. She'd come to every holiday dinner, every backyard barbecue, and any major life event. She was that friend who was always around. Emily adored her, and I just got used to her presence, to the point where I barely noticed how involved she was in every part of Emily and John's life. It never seemed weird, at least not until recently. I don't know exactly when things started to feel off, but it began with little things that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was subtle at first, small, easily dismissible observations. I noticed that Sarah and John seemed closer than usual. For example, during family gatherings, they'd sit together in ways that felt too comfortable. Their legs would touch under the table, and they'd have these inside jokes that Emily wasn't part of. It didn't feel malicious at the time, but I started to feel this nagging sense that something was off. The weirdest part was that Emily never seemed to notice. In fact, she was often busy entertaining guests or tending to something in the kitchen, completely unaware of how close her husband and her best friend were sitting on the couch, laughing at some private joke. I told myself I was being paranoid. I mean, Sarah was like family, right? And John had known her almost as long as he'd known Emily. Of course, they were comfortable with each other. They'd been friends for years. But still, something in the pit of my stomach wouldn't settle. I think the moment everything became real to me was one night a couple of months ago. I'd had a long day at work and was heading out to grab a drink at my favorite local bar. It was the kind of night where I just needed to unwind, maybe have a cocktail, and people watch. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a quiet evening by myself. But what I saw when I walked into that bar turned my whole world upside down. There, in the back corner booth, barely noticeable to anyone else, were John and Sarah. They weren't just talking or catching up, like I might have expected. No, they were sitting way too close, leaning into each other, and I could see John's hand resting on her knee in a way that was far too intimate. My heart started racing, and I told myself that maybe I was still overreacting, that maybe this was just some weird misunderstanding. But then, without warning, they kissed. Right there in the dimly lit bar, they were making out like a couple of teenagers sneaking around. I felt sick. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was my sister's husband. And Sarah, her best friend, the person she trusted most. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know what to do. So, I did the only thing I could think of, I snapped a picture with my phone. It wasn't the best photo, but it was clear enough. You could see John and Sarah locked in an embrace, oblivious to the world around them. I left the bar immediately, feeling like my legs might give out. I got into my car and just sat there, trying to breathe, trying to think. My mind was racing in a million different directions. What should I do? Should I confront them right there in the bar? Should I march up to them and demand answers? But the thought of causing a scene in public, of exposing them right there in front of strangers, felt wrong. I wasn't even sure how to process what I had just seen. I drove home in a daze. For weeks, I was tortured by what I knew. Every time I saw Emily, I felt this unbearable weight on my chest. How could I look her in the eyes, knowing that her whole life was a lie? But at the same time, I was terrified of the consequences of telling her. Was I about to blow up her entire world? What if I told her, and she didn't believe me? What if I ruined her marriage and her friendship with Sarah? I felt like I was holding a grenade, and pulling the pin would destroy everything. The breaking point came one night when Emily and I were out to dinner. We were chatting casually when she started talking about Sarah, about how they were planning a girls' weekend getaway. I could barely keep my face straight as she gushed about how much she trusted Sarah, how Sarah had always been her rock, especially during tough times in her marriage. I wanted to scream, to tell her that Sarah wasn't who she thought she was, that she was betraying her in the worst way possible. But instead, I just sat there, nodding along, my stomach in knots. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I blurted it out. I told Emily I needed to talk to her about something serious. She looked at me with concern, and I immediately felt this surge of guilt, like I was about to drop a bomb that would destroy everything. I saw John with Sarah, I said, my voice trembling. They were at a bar together, and they were kissing. At first, she just stared at me, like I had spoken in a foreign language. Her face was completely blank. I could see her mind trying to catch up to what I was saying, to make sense of the impossible. She shook her head, her brow furrowing. "No, that's impossible," she said, her voice rising with disbelief. "You're wrong. You must have seen something else." I showed her the photo. She took one look at it and froze. Her hands were trembling as she held my phone. Then she looked at me with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Are you jealous? Are you trying to ruin my life?" I felt the tears welling up, but I couldn't back down. I stood there, letting her yell at me, because I knew this was something she needed to get out. She accused me of trying to stir drama, of being envious of her life, her marriage, her friendship with Sarah. It hurt, but I understood. I just let her scream because I knew the truth would eventually sink in. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, she stopped. She was breathing heavily, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. I wasn't lying. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Her husband and her best friend had been sneaking around behind her back for months. The confrontation that followed with John and Sarah was brutal. When she finally confronted them, they couldn't deny it. They admitted everything. They'd been having an affair for 6 months, and they both looked at Emily with these pathetic, apologetic expressions that made me sick. Emily kicked John out of the house that night. She filed for divorce within days, and Sarah? She was completely cut out of our lives. Emily thanked me for telling her the truth, though it took her a while to get there. At first, she was angry and in denial, but eventually, she came to me in tears, saying she would have never known if I hadn't told her. She felt like an idiot for missing the signs, but how could she have known? She trusted them both completely. But while Emily was thankful, my parents had a completely different reaction. They were furious. My mom and dad believed that I had ruined Emily's marriage by telling her about the affair. They said that sometimes people can move on from infidelity, that by telling her, I hadn't given her a chance to work things out with John. My dad even said, "You left her no choice. You blew everything up instead of letting them try to fix it." Their anger has been one of the hardest parts to deal with. I thought I was doing the right thing by being honest with Emily, by not letting her live a lie. But now I'm questioning everything. Did I make things worse? Should I have stayed quiet and let her figure it out on her own? Should I have let them work it out, as my parents suggested? Now, my family feels divided. Emily's been leaning on me for support, but my parents are keeping their distance. It feels like they blame me for the fact that John is no longer in our lives, that the family dynamic has shifted in a way we can never undo. I didn't expect to lose my relationship with my parents over this, but here we are. It's hard not to feel like the bad guy. Emily is hurting, but she's grateful that she knows the truth. Yet my parents are acting like I ripped our family apart by getting involved. And honestly, I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it can be fixed. So, AITA for telling my sister the truth? Should I have kept quiet and let her live in blissful ignorance?